Hello and welcome back. So now we are ready to start setting up our tools. We already set up VS Code and Docker. For me, I have Docker running. So before you can continue with this, you make sure you have Docker running. Okay. And for me, I'm using Docker Desktop. Maybe if you're on Windows or Mac, you're using Docker Desktop, or if you're on Linux, probably there's a Docker Desktop that's available. You can use that as well. Otherwise, make sure you have Docker installed and running. Okay, so the first tool that we want to set up with Docker Compose is Redis. Like I explained in the video where I talked about the different tools, we don't need to install them on our local machine. We can just run them with Docker Compose. And for that, we need to create the Docker Compose YAML file and then create them as services. So the first service we're going to create is Redis. Normally, you could have just gone to the Redis documentation and then just copied whatever command is required to run Redis on your local machine, but we don't want to do that. Okay, probably you might not need it after this course, so it doesn't make sense for it to be running on your machine if you don't need it. So we want to set them up with Docker Compose so that you can easily tear them down or restart them at any time. Okay, so we are going to run Redis. So but the first thing before we go to the page for Redis, let's create the folder where we are going to create our Docker Compose YAML file. Okay, so I'm going to go to the folder. So this is going to be like the main folder that will contain the microservices and also the client's file folder. Okay, so let me see. I'll go to Documents. Okay, and then let me create a folder. I'll call this Jobber app. To let you know, the name of the application that we're going to be building is called Jobber. Okay, so that is the name I just came up with. So the name of the application is going to be called Jobber. Now the main folder is going to be called Jobber app. So code. Let's open it with VS Code. Okay, so now I can minimize this. Let me minimize it. Okay, so this is where I'm going to create the other folders, the client folder, the microservices folder, and also our Docker Compose YAML file. So the first thing in this file, you can create the docker-compose.yaml. Now note, if I think Docker Compose comes bundled with Docker Desktop, but if you don't have that, probably you can install that separately. Okay, but I think it comes bundled with Docker and Docker Desktop. So if you have it running, I think it should work out of the box. But if it doesn't, then you have to install Docker Compose separately. But I doubt if that is the case. Okay, so now we have the Docker Compose file. What we need to do is we want to create a service. Okay, and the first thing we need is the version, and the version is 3.9. okay, probably it might be a different version, but 3.9 is sufficient for what we want to do. And then the next block is going to be services. Okay, now this is where we are going to name our services. The first service we want to create is the Redis service. Okay, now let's go to the Docker Hub. You can then search for Redis. So let's see how we can run it. Okay, so it's the official Redis image that we want to use, the Docker official image, and then these ones are from verified publisher, but this is the one we want, so you can go right here. Okay, now you can just go through this. You see the different tags that are supported and the Docker file links, and you can scroll down to see if you just want to run a container out of this image without setting up Docker Compose. You can do that, it's possible, but for us, we want to do it with Docker Compose. Okay, so we are going to check the tag, right? These are the different tags, supported tags. You can check here also to see. For every Docker image, you will likely see the latest. So the latest contains the latest tag that was published. So here for this, at this point in time, this was published about an hour ago. And then there are other versions. If you want to use a specific version, you can do that as well. Okay, but the version that we are going to use is the, I think let me see if I can find it right here. Let me see if I can find the Alpine. Okay, so this is the version that we're going to use. The Alpine version is a very lightweight Docker image. Okay, so I'm going to use the Alpine version. So this is the version I'm going to use. Okay, now to do that, to create a service inside Docker Compose, you add the service name, and here we are using the YAML. So the name of the service will be Redis : and then we can create the other key value pairs. The first thing is container name. So what do you want to call the container? I'll call this Redis container. So locally, if we want to access the Redis service, we are going to use this container name. Okay, so this is what we are going to use to access the Redis service. So that's why this container name is very important. Okay, because we are running on our local machine. Docker has a way of setting up the networks. So all we just need to do in order to access the container will be to use the container name. Okay, and then the image. Now the image we want to use is the Alpine image. So it's going to be the name Redis and then the image, which is Alpine. The reason for this is very lightweight. Okay, it's more lighter than than other tags. Okay, so that's why we are using this. Then the restart policy. Restarts, we'll set this to always. So if there's an issue, if we're restarting the container, okay, so the policy here, we are setting it to restart. If it fails, we want it to restart. Okay, and then we set our ports. This is good. I think this is going to be a list. In YAML, this is how you specify a list, and then we specify the port. Remember, Redis port is 6379. 6379 inside the container, we are mapping it to 63379 outside the container. Okay, so this is the port inside the container. This is the port we are going to use to access the service outside the container. Okay, so we set the container name, we set the image, the restart policy, we set the port. We can set a command. So command right here, we can see Redis server. Just to set a log level, I'll set this to warning. Okay, you can always check this documentation right here to see if you to just check out the informations that are available. Okay, or you can search online. Okay, so the image variant Redis and then the version, or you can use an Alpine version or whatever. Okay, so this is just the log level. Now, one other thing we need to do is, because we are running this locally, we need a way for Docker to store the data, because Redis is like a database. So the data needs to be stored somewhere. Okay, and we can do that by creating volumes. So when you hear Docker and volumes in the same sentence, just know they're just talking about database. Okay, so volumes are like storage. Okay, where Docker stores data. Now, since Redis is a database, we are running it locally. The data needs to be stored somewhere, and we can do that by creating volumes. And we're going to create a local volume. Okay, so the volume will be stored in the same directory. Okay, so that the volume will contain all the information that we are sending to Redis. So volumes right here. And then just add the paths. Okay, so I'm going to say // Now inside this directory, there's going to be a folder called Docker volumes. Okay, and then inside there's going to be a cache data, and then we are going to map it to / data. Now these Docker volumes will be created when we run this service, so we don't need to create it. It will be created when we run the service. And then also it's going to create this cache directory. Now what this means is this is local, and then this is what we are getting from Redis. So the path / data from Redis, we want to map it to Docker volume / cache on our local machine. That is what this just means. Okay, so where the data is supposed to be stored on Redis, we are mapping it to this local path on our local machine. Okay, so this is just all we need in order for us to create our Docker Compose Redis service.